She was 2 steps from the dumpster when she heard it. It wasn't the rain, and it wasn't the thunder cracking open the night sky above Busan. It wasn't the wind throwing itself against the walls of the alley like a caged animal trying to get inside. It was something else. Ngozi stopped walking. The trash bags in her hands dripped with rain as she stood completely still in the middle of that dark, drowning alley. She listened. There it was again. Faint, broken, barely there. It sounded like a cry that had been fighting for a long time and was finally running out of fight. She dropped the bags. She ran toward the sound, the bin at the far end of the alley. Throwing the lid back with both hands, the rain poured in, and she saw it. Her heart stopped completely, then restarted in a completely different rhythm than it had ever known before. A baby girl, newborn, wrapped in a soaked cloth, her skin the color of something that should have been warm but wasn't. Mouth open, the cry that had pulled Ngozi across that alley was already fading fast. She grabbed her. Pressing the tiny body against her chest, she tilted the baby's head back, covered that tiny nose with her lips, and breathed. 1 breath. 2. She pressed 2 fingers to the baby's chest, counted, pressed, counted. The baby girl coughed. Then she screamed, loud, furious, completely, magnificently, impossibly alive. Ngozi held her so tight her own hands shook. She did not know yet whose baby this was. She did not know yet that somewhere across the city, a dangerous man was searching quietly, methodically, the way only the most dangerous kind of men search, like a man who has already decided what happens when he finds what he is looking for. She did not know that the answer to everything was screaming in her arms. She only knew one thing. She was not letting go. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Before we go any further, ask yourself this: what would you have done? Because what Ngozi did next changed absolutely everything. Now, to understand why Ngozi was in that alley on that night, in a foreign country, in a monsoon, holding a baby that the world had thrown away, you have to go back. Not just to Korea, but to the girl she was before Korea tried to break her. Enugu, Nigeria, a city of red earth and loud breathing markets and families who love each other like architecture. Every person a wall that somebody else leans against. Ngozi was the second of 4 children. She was the daughter of a retired school teacher who believed that education was the closest human beings had ever come to touching God, and a market trader mother who believed that God specifically helped the people who woke up before 4 in the morning and got to work. Ngozi had grown up between those 2 philosophies and quietly become both of them. Sharp enough to study anything, stubborn enough to survive everything. Her obsession with South Korea started at 15, and it was the kind of obsession that other people found strange, but she found entirely logical. While her friends filled their walls with American cities, Ngozi was teaching herself Hangul in the margins of her school notebooks. She watched Korean films. With handwritten subtitles, she translated herself. She practiced vocabulary at the dinner table until her father started calling her his little Korean. Half joke, entirely proud. She was not chasing a trend. She was chasing something specific. The feeling that there was a version of her life waiting in a country she had never touched. A language she had not yet mastered. A world that did not yet know her name. And she intended to go find it. At 23, the dream became a plane ticket, a partial scholarship to Busan National University for Korean Language and Cultural Studies. Her father sold a portion of their land quietly. So quietly that her mother did not find out until it was already done and could not be argued back. Her mother fasted for 3 days before the flight. Her younger siblings made handwritten signs at the airport that said, "Come back rich," in large, terrible, beautiful letters, and she laughed so hard she nearly missed her boarding call. She did not miss it. She boarded that plane with everything she owned in 2 bags, and a heart so full of wanting that there was barely room for fear. South Korea hit her like a wall of cold and wonder at the same time. Busan was nothing like she had imagined, and exactly like she had imagined, simultaneously, impossibly. The cold arrived first and settled into her Nigerian bones like a personal argument she had not prepared for. But the city itself, mountains dropping straight into the sea, port lights burning their reflection into the water at night, steam rising from street food carts on every corner, felt like the city itself was breathing. It was real in a way that dreams rarely survive becoming. She studied hard. She made 2 friends, a Korean girl named Ji-yoon, who found Ngozi's Busan dialect attempts absolutely hilarious, and an Ethiopian student named Salem, who became her emergency contact, her co-conspirator, and the person she called when everything felt too far from home. For 1 year, life was almost exactly what she had crossed an ocean for. Then, the letter came. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. That was the thing that stayed with Ngozi longest afterward. Not the news itself, but the indifference of its length. 2 paragraphs to dismantle everything. 2 paragraphs to inform her that the scholarship organization had lost its government funding and that all support was discontinued, effective immediately. 2 paragraphs, a reference number at the top, and a signature at the bottom from someone whose name she would never remember because she read it once and never looked at it again. She sat on the edge of her bed in her campus room and read it twice. Then she folded it. She put it in the drawer beside her bed. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the Busan skyline for a long time without moving. She did not cry. She had learned very early, from watching her mother stand in hospital corridors and market stalls and every hard place life had ever put her, that crying was something you did after. After you had thought, after you had planned, after you had looked the problem directly in its face and taken its full measure. Tears before that were a luxury, and Ngozi had never been able to afford luxury, so she stood at the window and thought, 90 days. That was how long her student visa had before it collapsed without enrollment to hold it up. She had 90 days to find another institution, another funding source, another door into the future she had come here to build. She made a list that same night. Every option, every contact, every professor who had praised her work, every administrative office that handled international student appeals. She wrote it in the small notebook she kept beside her bed, the same notebook where she had once practiced Hangul in the margins. She started knocking on doors the next morning. The doors did not open. She appealed the scholarship termination. Denied. She applied for emergency enrollment deferment. The university had no framework for it. She contacted 3 international student support organizations. 2 did not respond. 1 responded to say they could not assist students whose primary funding had already lapsed. She wrote letters. She made phone calls. She sat in waiting rooms with the patience of someone who understood that patience was not the same as surrender. Every door closed, and while the doors were closing in Busan, the phone calls from home were getting heavier. Her mother had been unwell for months, small things at first, fatigue, a cough that would not leave, weight dropping quietly week by week. The kind of unwell that Nigerian mothers describe as, "Nothing serious, I am fine. Focus on your studies," because they have spent their whole lives making their pain smaller so their children's dreams can stay large. But the hospital visits had started, and then the bills had started. Her younger brother had called one Tuesday evening with the careful voice of someone delivering news they have been rehearsing. The diagnosis was serious. The treatment was possible. The cost of the treatment was not small. Ngozi listened to her brother's voice on the phone, looked at the wall of her room, and calculated. She was the only one abroad. the only one positioned theoretically to earn in a currency that could actually cover what was needed. Her father had already sold land. There was nothing left to sell. Going home was not an option. Not in the way people say things aren't options when they simply don't want to choose them. It was genuinely, structurally, completely not possible. Going home meant her mother's treatment stalled. Going home meant her brother's school fees disappeared. Going home meant that everything her father had quietly sacrificed, the land, the pride, the 3 years of dinner-table Korean vocabulary quizzes, collapsed into nothing. She was not going home. She was going to find a door. It was a Thursday afternoon, raining the way Busan rained in that season, like the sky had a personal grievance. She found herself standing on a quiet street in the older part of Seo district, in front of a restaurant she had passed twice before without stopping. First, Snow Restaurant. Dark, polished wood panels, paper lanterns hanging gold and still beneath the awning. The smell coming through the door was extraordinary. Slow-simmered broth, toasted sesame, and something deep and warm that made something in Ngozi's chest ache with a homesickness she couldn't entirely explain, because it wasn't even her home. It was just the idea of home, the smell of a place where someone was being taken care of. Beside the door, a small handwritten notice. Staff needed. Inquire inside. Ngozi stood in the rain and had a rapid, honest conversation with herself. She had no legal work papers. Her visa situation was already complicated. She had no Korean restaurant experience. She was a foreign student from Nigeria, standing soaking wet on a street that had no particular reason to welcome her. Every sensible thought she had told her to walk away. Then the door opened, and the woman standing in it looked at her with eyes that had clearly been reading people for a very long time and had already reached a preliminary conclusion. A small woman, silver hair pinned with exact, deliberate precision, dressed simply, but with the kind of careful neatness that signals a person who has decided exactly how the world will see them and is not open to negotiation on the matter. Her posture was the posture of someone who owned every room she walked into. Not aggressively, but completely. The way certain people carry authority so naturally that it stops feeling like authority and starts feeling like weather. She looked at Ngozi standing in the rain with her spine straight, her face composed, and her clothes dripping. "You look like you need hot soup and a job," she said, in slow, clear Korean. Something about her voice was warm, genuinely warm. But underneath the warmth, something else, something watchful, the eyes of a woman who was assessing, not just welcoming. The eyes of someone for whom kindness and calculation were not opposites but partners. Ngozi noticed it, a flicker of something she couldn't name. A small, quiet instinct that lived just below the surface of conscious thought. The kind of instinct that gets dismissed because you need the job, and the soup, and the room, and everything else this woman might be able to offer. She dismissed it. "I need both," Ngozi said in Korean. One elegant eyebrow rose. "You speak Korean well enough to work hard and not cause trouble." A pause, a study. The full, still attention of a woman taking complete inventory of another person. Not just what they showed, but what they were trying not to show. Then Madame Choi Soon-ja stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in. Soup first, then we talk." Ngozi walked through the door, and the warmth of the restaurant wrapped around her. The smell, the light, the heat. For one moment, standing in the entrance of a place she knew nothing about, she felt something loosen in her chest that had been locked tight since the morning she read that 2-paragraph letter. She should have paid more attention to the instinct. She didn't. She was cold, and she needed the job, and somewhere in this city, in a building that had no signage and no reason to exist on any official map, something was already moving, a world that Ngozi knew nothing about, a man she had never met, a silence that had been building for 18 months and was approaching the moment it could no longer hold. She walked into the restaurant, and the door closed behind her. The soup was extraordinary. That was the first thing. Rich, deep, fermented. The kind of flavor that takes days to build and cannot be faked or rushed. Ngozi sat across from Madame Sunja at a corner table near the kitchen. She ate and she talked. The older woman listened with the kind of complete, unblinking attention that most people never give, and that Ngozi, in her exhaustion and desperation, mistook entirely for kindness. She told her everything: the scholarship, the visa, the 90 days, her mother in the hospital in Enugu with bills arriving like quiet, insistent knocking that would not stop, her father, who had already given everything he had to give. She did not beg. Her father had raised her to present her situation with dignity and let people make their own decisions about it. So she laid it out clearly, held her head up, and waited. Sunja stirred her soup. She asked 2 questions, not many, just 2, but they were the kind of questions that cut straight to the architecture of a person. She asked what Ngozi was willing to do, and she asked what Ngozi was not willing to do under any circumstances. Ngozi answered both without hesitating. Sunja set her spoon down. "One condition," she said. "No trouble. No questions about things that are not your concern. You work, you eat, you sleep in the room upstairs. I keep half your wages and return them when you leave. Your going home money. You stay out of the back dining room when I have private guests." She held Ngozi's gaze across the table, steady, absolute. "Agreed." "Agreed," Ngozi said. She should have asked about the back dining room. She didn't. 8 months passed, and here is what those 8 months looked like for Ngozi. 4:30 in the morning, up before the city, prepping broth that had to simmer for hours before the first customer arrived. Hands red from cold water and washing, floors swept, tables wiped, lanterns straightened. Korean pouring out of her faster every week. Not textbook Korean anymore, but real Korean. Busan Korean. The kind with edges and humor and rhythm that you only learn by living inside it. Madame Sunja correcting her pronunciation with a sharp tap on the counter, and then, when Ngozi got it right, giving a small nod that felt somehow like the highest praise available. Money going home every month. Not much, but enough. Her mother's treatment continuing. Her brother's school fees covered. The weight on Ngozi's chest not gone, but manageable. The weight of someone carrying something heavy who has found the right way to hold it. She made the regulars laugh. She learned which customers wanted to be left alone and which ones wanted someone to talk to. She mastered the menu so completely that Sunja started sending her to the market alone to negotiate with suppliers. And she negotiated well because stubbornness, it turned out, was a universal commercial language. Late nights. Sometimes men arriving after midnight in quiet, expensive cars, disappearing into the back dining room, leaving before dawn. Ngozi noticed. She filed it away in the part of her mind reserved for things that were not her concern. She had agreed to that condition. She kept it. She built a small, disciplined, dignified life inside those restaurant walls. She had no idea what those walls were built on. But while Ngozi was building, somewhere across Busan, another woman was quietly, slowly being taken apart. Seo Yan was 28 years old, and she was so lonely that some mornings she stood in the kitchen of her enormous, immaculate house, listened to the silence, and felt it pressing against her eardrums like something physical. She had been beautiful her whole life, and had learned early that beauty was not protection. It was not power. It was not love. It was simply a thing that people commented on while deciding more important things about you, things you were rarely consulted about. Her marriage to Choi Jae-won had been arranged. Both families had agreed. Both sides had run the calculations and found the numbers acceptable. Nobody had asked Seo-yeon what she wanted. But then nobody in her world had ever made a habit of asking that particular question. She had told herself she could manage it. She had watched her mother manage a similar arrangement for 30 years with grace and endurance, and a particular kind of quiet courage that Seo-yeon had grown up admiring and had only recently begun to understand the true cost of. She would manage it too. But her mother's arrangement had at least involved a man who came home. Jae-won was always elsewhere. He was not cruel. He did not insult her, did not raise his voice, did not make her feel small in any of the obvious ways. He simply did not see her. She existed in his house the way furniture existed, present, functional, occasionally noticed when something was out of place. He looked through her at dinner. He answered her questions with the minimum number of words required. He moved through their shared spaces like a man who had forgotten she was there and had decided not to inconvenience himself by remembering. Loneliness inside a beautiful house, inside a powerful marriage, is a particular kind of slow damage. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive all at once. It accumulates the way water accumulates in a place with no drainage. Quietly, steadily, until one day you realize you are standing in it up to your knees and cannot remember when it started. Seo-yeon was standing in it. And then came the evening that made everything worse. It was a Tuesday. Jae-won had come home earlier than usual, which should have felt like something. But by then, Seo-yeon had learned not to build anything on the foundation of his unexpected appearances. He sat across from her at dinner, and he was already different. Already somewhere else behind his eyes. Already carrying something that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with her, simultaneously. She noticed immediately. She had become an expert in the geography of his silences. She set down her chopsticks. "Something happened," she said. He looked at her, really looked, which was itself unusual enough to make her chest tighten. "I was told something today," he said, "about you." The temperature in the room dropped. "What were you told?" she asked, careful, steady. "That you were seen meeting privately with an associate of the Park faction." He said it the way he said everything, quietly, without drama, which somehow made it worse than shouting. "Twice in the past month." Seo-yeon felt the blood leave her face. "That is not what happened," she said. "Tell me what happened." "I met my cousin for lunch at the Lauda Hotel. Han Min-jae, you have met him. Jae-won, you know who he is. In the lobby, we crossed paths with a man my cousin knew. We spoke for perhaps 5 minutes. I did not know who he was. I did not arrange to meet him. It was a coincidence in a hotel lobby." "Twice," Jae-won said. "I was at that hotel twice in 2 weeks because my cousin was staying there. The second time, I did not even see that man." Silence. "Jae-won," her voice was very controlled. "You know me. Whatever you were told, you know me." He looked at her for a long time. In his eyes there was not anger. Anger she could have worked with. What was in his eyes was something colder and more permanent than anger. It was the expression of a man rearranging his understanding of something he thought he had already correctly understood. "I want to believe you," he said finally. "Then believe me. It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, just slightly. A hairline fracture in the composure she had been maintaining. "I have done nothing. I have never done anything. I am your wife, and I have done nothing. And you are looking at me like, if you ever carry a child in this house," he said quietly, and the quietness of it was what silenced her completely, "I will need to be certain it is mine." The words landed like something physical. Seo-yeon sat completely still. Jae-won stood, straightened his jacket with the calm efficiency of a man concluding a meeting, and left the room. The door did not slam. It closed softly. Somehow, that was worse. Seo-yeon sat at the dinner table alone. The food was still warm. The room was completely silent. And she replayed those words. "I will need to be certain it is mine," and felt them carve themselves into something permanent. She did not know yet that those words had not been accidental. She did not know yet that the information Jae-won had received, the carefully packaged, deliberately delivered accusation, had been fed to him by someone who understood exactly what those words would make him say. She did not know yet that the coldness now settling into her marriage like concrete had been engineered. She only knew that the man she had married had just looked her in the face and told her, in the most civilized possible way, that he did not fully trust her, and that somewhere in the architecture of everything that followed that moment was the foundation, the cracked, poisoned, deliberately broken foundation that everything else would be built on. She found out on a Wednesday morning in March. The test was from a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away. Not the one near the restaurant, not anywhere she might be recognized. She had paid cash. She had walked home the long way, through streets she didn't usually take. The paper bag was folded small inside her coat pocket like contraband. She took it in the bathroom with the door locked and the tap running, and then she sat on the cold tile floor and she looked at it. 2 lines. She sat there for a very long time without moving. The tap kept running. The steam from the hot water slowly filled the small room, and the mirror above the sink disappeared into white fog. And still she sat there on the cold floor with the test in both hands, and she looked at it. She was not confused about whose child it was. There had been one night, unexpected, almost accidental. The one night in recent memory when something almost human had moved between her and Jae-won before the distance reassembled itself. She knew exactly. There was no question. But the words were already in her head. His words from that dinner table, spoken quietly, placed down like stones. "I will need to be certain it is mine." She closed her eyes. She wrapped the test in tissue. She buried it at the bottom of the bathroom bin, under everything else. She stood up, turned off the tap, looked at her own reflection, appearing slowly as the fog cleared from the mirror, and she made a decision in that silence that she understood was dangerous and lonely and completely necessary. Nobody would know. Not yet. Not until she understood what knowing would cost her. For 7 months, Seo-yeon hid it with the systematic, exhausting precision of a woman whose survival had always required concealment. Loose clothing, chosen carefully. Not dramatically loose, just enough. The housekeeper dismissed on a pretext, replaced with a cleaning service that came twice a week and knew nothing about her. Prenatal vitamins ordered anonymously online, delivered to a pickup point 2 streets away. Every meal calculated, every outing managed. Every interaction with Jae-won, which were few and brief, and conducted across the enormous, careful distance that had settled permanently between them, navigated with the attention of someone walking across ice. She told no one. She was alone with it in a way that had its own specific weight. Not just the loneliness of the pregnancy, but the loneliness of carrying a secret that was also a life that kicked and turned and hiccuped inside her in the dark, and that she could not speak about to a single person on earth. She talked to the baby in whispers sometimes at night, when the house was completely silent and Jae-won was away, and she was certain no sound would carry anywhere. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach and she whispered in Korean, in the fragments of English her mother had taught her, sometimes in nothing more than sound, as though the baby could hear the intention, if not the words. She almost made it. Madame Sunja arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning, a habit the entire household had simply absorbed as a condition of existing in the orbit of Choi Jae-won's mother. She had her own key. She used it without apology. Seo Yan was in the upstairs bathroom. 7 months along, bent over the sink with the particular gracelessness of a heavily pregnant woman who had been on her feet too long and whose body was now filing formal complaints. The loose dress she was wearing had shifted. There was no explaining the shape of her from the doorway. She heard a sound and turned. Madame Sunja stood in the bathroom doorway. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across the older woman's face that was not calculation, not strategy. Something older and more instinctive than either of those things. Her eyes moved to Seo Yan's stomach, and something in them softened, genuinely softened. The way eyes soften when they see new life and the body responds before the mind can intervene. Her hand came up slightly, almost involuntarily, as though reaching toward something. Then she stopped. The softness did not disappear. It was rerouted, redirected, pressed down beneath something harder and more practiced. The machine behind those elegant eyes switched back on. And what replaced the softness was the expression Seo Yan had always found most unreadable about her mother-in-law. That perfect, composed, revealing nothing stillness. "How far along?" she asked. 7 months, Seo Yan whispered. Sunja said nothing else. She went downstairs and made tea. She sat across from Seo Yan at the kitchen table, and she was quiet for a very long time. The tea cooled between them. The house made its small sounds. The refrigerator, the wind against the windows, the distant traffic. And behind Madame Sunja's gracious, careful eyes, the machine was running, calculating, measuring risk and exposure, and the particular vulnerability that a child, especially one whose parentage J1 had publicly poisoned with doubt, represented in a world built entirely on the absence of soft places. A child was leverage. A child was a target. A child was a crack in an empire that could not afford cracks. She made her decision at that kitchen table. In the silence over cooling tea, she told Seo Yan she would handle everything. Seo Yan, alone for 7 months with a secret she had carried in silence and terror, looked at this woman's composed, certain face and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she was not entirely alone. She trusted her. That was the most devastating mistake of her life. The storm arrived on a Tuesday night in November. It came fast, the way Busan storms came in that season, without apology. The sky simply opening itself and pouring everything it had onto the city below. By 10 p.m., the streets were empty, and the rain was the loudest thing in the world, and the wind threw itself against every surface it could find like something that had been locked out and was furious about it. Seo Yan had been in labor since 7 p.m. The pain arrived the way serious pain always arrives, not gradually, not with warning, but as a sudden rearrangement of reality in which everything that existed before it becomes theoretical. She gripped the headboard of the bed, and she breathed the way she had read to breathe, and it helped approximately nothing. Madame Sunja arrived within 20 minutes. Not with an ambulance. With Dr. Park, a small, quiet man with careful hands and eyes that had seen enough to be permanently unsurprised by anything. He set his bag down without speaking, and got to work with the efficient calm of someone for whom this was simply another task on a long list. There was no hospital, no nurses, no other women, no one who knew her. Just this room, this storm, this pain. The labor went on for hours. Hours in which Seo Yan existed in a place beyond ordinary sensation, a raw, tearing animal place where the body takes over completely and the mind becomes simply a passenger watching, unable to intervene. She called for her mother once, not deliberately, not consciously, just a sound that came from somewhere below thought. The oldest, most instinctive cry a human being can make. Her mother was cities away and knew nothing. Sunja held her hand and made her voice soft and said all the right things in all the right tones. Seo-yeon held onto that hand and pushed. At 11:47 p.m., the baby came. A girl, small, pink, absolutely, furiously alive. She cried immediately. A full, clear, powerful cry that cut straight through the sound of the storm and filled the room. And Seo-yeon heard it. And something in her that had been clenched tight for 7 months released all at once. She reached out with shaking arms. "Let me hold her." "Please rest," Sunja said, stepping forward. "I want to hold my baby. Please let me." "You lost blood. Rest first." She took the baby and she looked down at her face. And there it was again. That flicker, that involuntary, unguarded, terribly human flicker of something that lived beneath every calculation she had ever made. The baby's eyes were closed. Her tiny fists were clenched beside her face. She was so new that the world had not yet had a single second to mark her. Sunja looked at her for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which something behind her eyes wavered. Then she looked at Dr. Park. He looked back at her. He understood. He had been paid to understand for many years without being asked to speak. She nodded once. Dr. Park administered a mild sedative to Seo-yeon. "For the blood loss," he said, "for the exhaustion. Completely routine. Rest now." Within minutes, Seo-yeon's eyes closed. Her arms, still reaching, went still. Sunja wrapped the baby in a kitchen cloth. She walked downstairs. She walked through the back of the house and out into the rain without stopping, without looking back, without allowing herself another 3 seconds of wavering. She got in the car. She drove to his building without stopping. Jae-won was still awake. He opened the door himself, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, possessing the particular restlessness of a man who had been waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. He looked at his mother's face. He read it the way he read everything, instantly. "What happened?" he asked. She walked past him into the room. She did not sit. "Seo-yeon delivered tonight," she said. "There were complications. The baby did not survive." Her voice was smooth, final, the voice that closed things. "Everything has been handled. Dr. Park filed the necessary documentation. There is nothing for you to manage." Jae-won said nothing for a long moment. "And Seo-yeon?" "Resting. She will need you." He looked at his mother's face, searching for something. Grief, disturbance, anything human. Her face gave him nothing. "I am sorry," he said quietly. Madame Sunja straightened her jacket with both small, precise hands. "These things happen," she said. She left before he could ask another question. Outside, the rain had not stopped, and in an alley 2 kilometers away, something she had decided was finished was just beginning to cry. Ngozi was tying the last trash bag of the night. She had stayed late because a storm had knocked a display shelf, and she refused to leave a mess for the morning. She had no idea what was coming toward her through the rain. She was 2 steps from the bin when she heard it. It wasn't the rain, and it wasn't the thunder cracking open the sky above Busan. It wasn't the wind throwing itself against the walls of the alley like something trying to get inside. It was something else. Ngozi stopped walking. The trash bags in her hands dripped with rain. She stood completely still in the middle of that dark, drowning alley, and she listened. There it was again, faint, broken, barely there, like a sound that had already been fighting for a long time and was running out of fight. She dropped the bags. She ran toward the sound, the bin at the far end of the alley. She threw the lid back with both hands, and the rain poured in, and she saw it. Her heart stopped completely, and then restarted in a completely different rhythm than it had ever known before. A baby girl, newborn, wrapped in a soaked cloth, skin the color of something that should have been warm and wasn't. Mouth open, the cry that had pulled Ngozi across that alley already fading. Fading fast. She grabbed her. She pressed the tiny body against her chest, and she tilted the baby's head back, and she covered that tiny nose with her lips, and she breathed. 1 breath. 2. She pressed 2 fingers to the baby's chest, counted, pressed, counted. She counted out loud in Igbo, the way her first aid instructor had taught her. Always out loud. It keeps the rhythm and keeps the mind from breaking. Otu, abuo, ato, ano. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rain screamed against every surface in that alley. Her tears fell onto the baby's face. Her hands shook so badly she nearly lost count twice and found it again both times through sheer refusal. "Please," she said between counts. "Please, please, God, please, not this baby, not this one." The baby girl coughed. Then she screamed, loud, furious, completely, magnificently, impossibly alive. Her color shifting in Ngozi's hands, the terrible blue retreating, pink flooding in like sunrise after the longest night. Her fists clenched, her legs kicked with the full, indignant energy of someone who has somewhere important to be and has been unreasonably delayed. Ngozi collapsed forward over the baby, sobbing, shaking, unable to stop. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The baby screamed, and the sound of her, loud and alive and completely unaware of how close the silence had come, was the most beautiful thing Ngozi had ever heard in her entire life. She carried her upstairs, wrapped in her own sweater, pressed against her heartbeat. Later that night, in the small quiet of her room, with the storm softening outside and the baby fed and drowsy and warm against her chest, Ngozi pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and set it into the dark. "Tobena. In Igbo, I know what good is. You are good," she whispered. "Whatever brought you here, whatever they thought you were, I see you." 3 weeks. That was how long Ngozi secretly raised a newborn baby girl above a restaurant in Busan, South Korea, completely alone, with no instruction manual, no support system, and absolutely no sleep. The first night was the most terrifying thing she had ever survived, and she had survived a visa collapse, a family medical crisis, and 8 months of building a life from scratch in a foreign country. None of that had prepared her for a newborn needing to be fed every 2 hours without negotiation. Tobena did not care that it was 3 in the morning. She did not care that Ngozi had a 6 a.m. prep shift starting in a few hours. She was hungry, and she was new to the world, and she had opinions about both of those things, and she communicated them at full volume with complete conviction. Ngozi learned to hear the difference between the hunger cry, the discomfort cry, and the "I simply want to be held" cry within 4 days. Not because anyone told her how, but because Tobena taught her through sheer repetition and was, above everything else, an extraordinarily fast learner. She flew upstairs on every break during her shift. 5 minutes, feed, check, hold, breathe, back downstairs before anyone noticed the gap. She moved through the restaurant with the particular focused energy of someone operating on 3 hours of sleep and 12 hours of adrenaline. And if the other staff noticed, she seemed different, more distracted, more electric, more fiercely present in a way she hadn't been before. Nobody said anything directly. She bought everything Tobena needed in small quantities from different shops across 3 different neighborhoods. Formula from one place, diapers from another, a small soft blanket from a market stall on the other side of CO District from a vendor who would not remember her face. She was systematic about it, covering tracks she wasn't even sure needed covering. But something in her understood instinctively that what she was holding was not just a baby. It was a secret, and secrets this size had weight. She fell in love the way you fall into deep water when you didn't plan to swim. Completely, suddenly, without the possibility of going back to the shore and pretending it hadn't happened. It wasn't the soft, gradual love she had imagined motherhood might feel like someday in some distant, theoretical future. It was immediate and total and slightly overwhelming, like something that had always been waiting inside her and had simply been looking for the right person to attach itself to. Tobena, for her part, found Ngozi's heartbeat to be the most satisfactory place in the world and communicated this clearly by going completely still and calm the moment she was held against Ngozi's chest, a fact that destroyed Ngozi freshly every single time it happened, without exception. She was going to figure out how to protect her. She was going to find a way, the way she always found a way. She just needed a little more time. She did not get it. It was a quiet Saturday evening. The restaurant had served its last table. The other staff were pulling on coats, saying goodnights, clattering out the front door into the cold night air with the easy looseness of people whose work was finished and whose homes were waiting. Ngozi was wiping down the last tables. Tobena was upstairs. She heard footsteps on the back stairs, slow, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who owned every surface they walked on. She moved fast, but not fast enough. Madame Choi Sunja stood at the top of the back stairs, with one hand resting on the wall and her eyes fixed on the door to Ngozi's room. Ngozi looked at her face and stopped breathing. Because that face, the face she had watched for 8 months, maintained perfect, unreadable composure through every situation, every late-night visitor, every pressure and difficulty the restaurant had absorbed, that face was doing something she had never seen it do. It was cracking. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who hadn't studied it as carefully as Ngozi had. But the composure was fractured, just slightly, just enough. And what was showing through the fracture was an expression that Ngozi could not immediately name, something between recognition and horror, the expression of a person who has just turned a corner and walked directly into something they buried and believed was gone. "Whose child is that?" she asked very quietly. Ngozi went completely still. "I found her," she said. The silence that followed had physical weight. "Where?" One word. Very careful. The carefulness of someone who already knew the answer and needed to hear it spoken aloud anyway. "In the trash bin behind the restaurant 3 weeks ago, on the night of the storm." Madame Sunja said nothing. Her hand tightened against the wall. From inside Ngozi's room, Tobena made a small sound. Not a cry, just a murmur. The soft, contented sound of a sleeping baby who trusts completely and absolutely that the world is safe and warm, and that the person who counts in Igbo will always come back. "You should have reported it," Sunja said. "I was going to. I am still working out. You should have reported it immediately." "I know, but she was dying, and I—" Ngozi stopped. She looked at Madame Sunja's face, and something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the November air. Something that rearranged in one quiet second the 8 months of carefully constructed trust. "Madame Sunja." The older woman's eyes did not meet hers. "Madame Sunja." Ngozi's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Do you know whose baby this is?" Silence. 5 full seconds of silence in which the only sound was Tobena breathing softly behind a locked door and the distant noise of the city existing entirely outside of this moment. Madame Choi Sunja said nothing, and her silence was the loudest answer Ngozi had ever received in her life. She did not know yet that 3 blocks from Busan's eastern port, in a building with no signage and blacked-out windows, a man was already looking at a photograph. A surveillance photograph of a young woman carrying a baby out of a 24-hour convenience store. He set it down. He picked up his phone. The front door of the restaurant opened downstairs. Footsteps on the restaurant floor. Slow, deliberate, confident. The footsteps of a man who had never once in his life entered a room uncertain of his right to be in it. "Omioni?" a man's voice called, deep and quiet in the particular way of voices that have never needed volume, because every room they enter simply adjusts. Your car is still here. I saw the light." The footsteps were moving toward the back stairs. Ngozi looked at Madame Sunja. Madame Sunja looked at Ngozi. And in the older woman's eyes, for one unguarded, uncontrolled second, was pure, naked fear. Not fear of the man coming up the stairs, fear of what was about to happen when he arrived at the top of them. Choi Jae-won appeared at the base of the stairs and looked up. He saw his mother's fractured composure. He saw the young woman standing in the hallway with her spine straight and her jaw set, and something in her eyes that was not fear. He had survived 34 years in the most dangerous world in Busan by reading rooms and faces and silences in under 2 seconds. He read this one instantly. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. He came up the stairs. He stopped in front of Ngozi, and she did not step back, did not drop her eyes, did not perform any of the deference that everyone in proximity to this man eventually performed, whether they intended to or not. She looked directly at him. "Who are you?" he asked. "The woman who works in your mother's restaurant," she said. "The woman who found your daughter in the trash bin behind it 3 weeks ago. The woman who brought her back to life." Not a tremor in her voice. Not a single one. Jae-won looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the door. "Open it," he said. Ngozi opened the door to her room and stepped aside. Choi Jae-won walked in. He stood in the doorway and he looked at the small room. The photographs of Nigeria pinned carefully to the wall. The formula station assembled with precise practicality on the dresser. The nest of sweaters and pillows on the narrow bed, constructed with the focused love of someone making the best possible version of something from whatever was available. And in the center of it, Tobena, sleeping, small and perfect, and completely unaware of the earthquake gathering in the doorway around her. Jae-won looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, and the audience needed to sit in that silence with him, because what happened to his face in those seconds was not dramatic, was not loud, was not any of the things that grief usually performs. It was the opposite. It was a man built entirely for stone trying to absorb something that stone was not designed to hold. The set of his jaw shifted. The line of his shoulders changed by a degree that was almost invisible and meant everything. His hands that had signed documents and made decisions and ended things, dropped open at his sides. He looked at his daughter. He looked at her for so long that the silence became its own kind of sound. Then he turned to his mother. "Tell me," he said. Not a request, not a question. The 2 words of a man who has already understood that something enormous has been kept from him and has decided that the next minutes will contain all of it. Every piece pulled out into the light, regardless of what that costs anyone in the room. Madame Sunja straightened, and she told him, "But not the way a person confesses when they believe they were wrong." She told him the way a person confesses when they believe they were right and are simply facing the consequence of a decision that the other person is too close to evaluate fairly. "You had already said it yourself," she began. "If a child came into this house, you would need to be certain it was yours. You said those words, Jae-won. I heard them. Tell me what you did." "The pregnancy was hidden from everyone. 7 months. She hid it from everyone, including you. That alone, a wife who conceals a pregnancy for 7 months. What does that tell you? What would your enemies have done with that? What would the Park faction have done the moment they heard there was a child in your house whose parentage you had publicly questioned? Tell me what you did." "I arranged everything privately. Dr. Park, the delivery at the house. I was protecting the clan from a vulnerability that could have been—" "You threw my daughter in a trash bin." Jae-won said it quietly, each word placed down like a stone on a table. Sunja's jaw tightened. "I made a decision under pressure that I believed—" "You threw my daughter in a trash bin." Quieter this time. The second repetition landed differently than the first, lower, slower, with the weight of something that had passed beyond anger into a place that had no name, but that everyone in the room felt in their chest like a change in air pressure before a serious storm. Sunja said nothing. The silence lasted a long time. Then, Tabena reached out from her nest of sweaters, eyes still closed, still sleeping, and her tiny hand found Ngozi's finger and closed around it with the focused, absolute grip of someone who has made a permanent decision. "Look at her," Jaewon said. Everyone looked at Tabena. "She is mine," he said. "Look at her face and tell me she is not mine." Nobody spoke. He turned to Ngozi fully. He gave her the complete, unhurried attention of a man who had spent his entire life deciding quickly what mattered and what didn't, and had just placed her in the category that mattered. "You saved her," he said. "Yes. Alone in the rain, on a night when you could have walked past and no one would have known." "I would have known," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. "Your visa situation," he said. "You said it was complicated." "My entire life in this country is currently complicated," she said, "in case you need the full picture." The corner of his mouth moved, barely, just barely. The ghost of something that in another life might have been the beginning of a smile. He reached for his phone. He made 2 calls, brief, precise. The kind of calls where the person on the other end does not ask questions because the voice making the request does not leave space for them. When he hung up, he looked at Ngozi. "It is no longer complicated," he said. "You have my word." In the world Choi Jae-won operated in, his word was the most valuable and most dangerous currency available. Ngozi did not fully know that yet, but she understood from the way the air in the room changed when he said it that it was not nothing. She nodded once. He looked at Tabena one more time. Then he left. 3 hours later, Jae-won sat at the edge of the bed in his own house, in a dark room, beside his wife. Seo-yeon was awake. She was always awake now. She had not slept properly in 3 weeks, lying in the dark, replaying the sound she had heard in that last corridor before the sedative pulled her under. The sound that she had been told was imagination. The sound that had the specific, unmistakable, absolutely real frequency of a newborn's first cry. Jae-won sat at the edge of the bed and he told her all of it. From the pregnancy he had not known about, to the storm, to the woman in the restaurant kitchen, to the small room with the photographs from Nigeria on the wall, to the baby sleeping in a nest of sweaters with a name that meant, "I know what good is." Seo-yeon did not move through any of it. She lay completely still with her eyes open in the dark, and she listened, and she did not make a sound. For a moment Jae-won hoped, that perhaps she was going to hold together. She didn't. It started with her hands. They came up to cover her face slowly, the way a person covers their face when they are trying to keep something inside that is already beyond containing. And then the sound came, quiet, wrecked. The sound of a woman who had been strong for so long and in so many impossible directions that the strength had simply run out all at once, like a structure that holds and holds and holds, and then does not hold anymore. She wept in a way that had no performance in it, no audience, no management, no careful presentation of grief. She wept like someone alone in the dark, even though she was not alone, because she had been alone for so long that she had forgotten how to feel accompanied. She wept for the 7 months of hiding, for the labor she had survived without a single person who loved her, for the cry she had heard and been told she imagined, for 3 weeks of believing her daughter was dead, while her daughter was alive 2 kilometers away, being held by a stranger who had loved her better and more completely than anyone who shared her blood. Jae-won sat with her in the dark. He did not know how to give comfort. He had not been raised for it, had not practiced it, had spent 34 years building himself into something that did not require it, and therefore did not learn to offer it. But he stayed. He did not leave the room, and after a very long time, when the weeping had exhausted itself into something quieter, Seo Yan lowered her hands from her face and stared at the ceiling. "I heard her cry," she whispered. "I told your mother. She looked me in the face and told me I imagined it. I know." "Can I see her tomorrow?" she asked. "Is she safe? Who has her?" A pause. "A woman," he said quietly, "who saved her life." Seo Yan closed her eyes, and somewhere across the city, a phone was about to ring. The phone buzzed on the dresser, once, twice. Ngozi stared at it from across the room. Unknown number, the screen lighting up in the dark like something that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment, and had now decided the moment had arrived. It buzzed again. She crossed the room. She picked it up. She answered. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of a bad connection, but the deliberate silence of someone who wanted the person on the other end to speak first, to give something away, to establish who was more unsettled before a single word was exchanged. Ngozi said nothing. She waited, and then the voice came. Unhurried Korean, spoken with the flat, affectless precision of someone who had long ago removed all warmth from their voice as a professional choice. "Is this the woman who found the baby?" Something moved down Ngozi's spine that was not cold air. "Who is this?" she asked. "Someone who has been looking for that child for 3 weeks, the voice said. "Someone who is very interested in the fact that she is still alive." Ngozi's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something clearly." A pause, deliberate, measured. The pause of a man who used silence the way other men use threats. "The child you are holding is not yours. She was never yours. And the people she belongs to, the people who are coming for her, are not people you want to be standing in front of when they arrive." "She belongs to no one who put her in a trash bin," Ngozi said. A silence, longer this time. "You are either very brave," the voice said, "or you do not yet understand what you are in the middle of." "Tell me what I am in the middle of," she said. "No," he said. "I think it is better that you find out yourself. It will be more convincing that way." The call ended. 43 seconds. Ngozi stood holding the phone in both hands in the dark. The city outside the window moved and breathed and went about its business with complete indifference, and Tobena slept behind her, making the small, trusting sounds of someone who does not yet know that trust can be a dangerous thing. If you have stayed with this story until this moment, if you have felt every single turn of it in your chest the way it was meant to be felt, then do not leave now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Like this video so more people find this story. Because what is coming, what the narrator is about to tell you, is the piece that changes everything you thought you understood about everything that came before it. The most dangerous secrets are never the ones that surprise you. They are the ones that, once revealed, make you look back at every moment you already witnessed and realize the truth was always there. You just weren't looking at the right thing. Here is what Choi Jae-won did not know. The lieutenant, the man who had delivered the accusation about Seo Yan 18 months ago, the carefully packaged information about a hotel lobby and a rival clan associate. The 2 words, "twice she was seen," that had poisoned Jae-won's trust in his own wife and planted the seed of everything that followed. That information had not found its way to him by accident. It had been fed deliberately, carefully, with the long patience of someone who thinks not in days or weeks, but in seasons, who plants something in winter and waits without anxiety for it to bloom into exactly the destruction they designed it for. The lieutenant had been paid, not in money. Money left trails. He had been paid in protection, in the quiet removal of a debt that would otherwise have ended his career and possibly his life. He had been given something he needed and had given something in return. A story, a half-truth dressed in the clothing of evidence, delivered to Jae-won at the precise moment when it would land with maximum damage. The person who had constructed that exchange, who had identified the lieutenant's vulnerability, cultivated it, and then deployed it with surgical precision at exactly the right time, was the same person who had sat across a kitchen table from a frightened pregnant woman and said, "I will handle everything." The same person who had held a newborn girl for 3 seconds in the light of a storm-battered bedroom. The same person who had wrapped that baby in a kitchen cloth, driven through the rain, made a phone call, and used the word stillbirth with the calm fluency of someone who had rehearsed it. Madame Choi Soon-ja had not acted from panic. She had not been surprised by the pregnancy. She had not made a sudden, desperate decision in a bedroom at midnight. She had been building toward that night for 18 months. The accusation against Seo-yeon engineered to make Jae-won doubt. The doubt cultivated to ensure that when a pregnancy came, his first instinct would be suspicion rather than joy. The suspicion designed to make the removal of the child not just possible, but almost logical, almost defensible, the natural conclusion of a sequence she had constructed from the very beginning. But why? Because Madame Choi Soon-ja had spent 30 years building her son into something untouchable, something that did not bend, something that did not soften. She had made him into the man who ran the Black Dragon clan with cold surgical precision, because she had removed systematically and deliberately every soft place in him that might have made him something less. And she had looked at Seo-yeon, quiet, enduring, patient Seo-yeon, and seen something she recognized as dangerous. Not dangerous like a weapon, dangerous like warmth, the kind of warmth that gets inside stone and, given enough time and enough love, breaks it. She had looked at the possibility of a child that Jae-won would love, that Seo-yeon would love, that would build between husband and wife a bond made of something she could not control or calculate or use. And she had decided, with the cold clarity of a woman who had always chosen power over everything, that it could not be allowed. The man on the other end of Ngozi's phone, he was the other side of it, a rival, a man who had been watching the Black Dragon clan for years, waiting for the fracture that would let him in. Sun-ja had used him as a tool, the lieutenant, the accusation, the chain of events. What she had not calculated was that he was also watching her, that he had traced the chain back to its origin, that he knew what she had done and why she had done it, and had spent 3 weeks trying to find the baby. Because a living child, Jae-won's legitimate child, rescued and alive and documented, was the most powerful weapon available against the woman who had tried to erase her. He did not want Tobena safe. He wanted her useful. Jae-won found out at 3 in the morning, not from his mother, from a document. Financial records, communication logs, a timeline assembled by the one person in his organization whose loyalty to him ran deeper than their loyalty to the woman who had built the organization. It arrived on his phone in a single file with no message attached, no explanation needed. He read it once. He sat completely still for a very long time. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. She answered on the second ring. "I know," he said. 3 words. She said nothing. "Not just the baby," he said. "All of it. The lieutenant, the accusation, the 18 months. The silence on the other end of the line was different from all her other silences, not composed, not calculating. The silence of a woman who has been building a house of careful architecture for a very long time and has just heard the sound of the first wall coming down. "I was protecting you," she said finally. "You were building me," he said. "There is a difference, and I think you know that." He ended the call. He sat in the dark, and for the first time in 34 years, Choi Jae-won, the man that other powerful men were careful around, the man who had been constructed from the ground up to feel nothing that could be used against him, allowed himself to feel the full weight of what his mother had taken from him. Not just the daughter, the wife he had turned cold on, the marriage he had poisoned with doubt that was never his doubt to begin with. The 3 years of distance that had been engineered by someone who loved him in the most dangerous possible way, the way that prioritizes the idea of a person over the actual living human being. He sat with all of it. And somewhere across Busan, in a small room above a restaurant, Ngozi was also sitting in the dark. Tabena was asleep against her chest, breathing in that slow, total, absolutely committed way that only sleeping babies breathe, as though sleep is itself a full-time occupation that deserves complete dedication. Her tiny hand had found Ngozi's finger again. It was always finding Ngozi's finger, as though even unconscious, even unreachable in the deep, warm country of newborn sleep. Some part of her knew exactly where safety was and held on to it with everything she had. Ngozi looked at her face, this face that the world had tried to throw away, this face that had cost more than anyone would ever fully know. Seo Yeon's 7 months of silent terror, the storm night, the bin, the 43 seconds of a phone call that had made the walls of the small, safe world she had built around this baby feel suddenly terribly thin. She looked at her, and she made the only decision available to her. The same decision she had made in the alley. The same decision she had made at the bin. The same decision she had made every single time the world had presented her with a door marked "Walk Away," and she had looked at it and turned in the opposite direction. She was not letting go. Not of this baby, not of this fight, not of whatever was coming through the dark toward both of them. The cold voice on the phone, the rival with the photograph, the city moving around them like water around two people trying to stay above it. She pressed her lips to Tabena's forehead. "I see you," she whispered. "I still see you." Outside, the city moved. Somewhere in a building with no signage and blacked-out windows, a man was making plans. Somewhere in a house on the hill, a woman who had engineered 18 months of destruction was sitting alone with the first silence she had not chosen. Somewhere in the dark, a husband and a father was understanding for the first time the full shape of everything he had lost and everything he intended to reclaim. And in a small room above a restaurant, a baby girl slept, unaware that she was the center of everything, unaware that the people who loved her and the people who wanted to use her and the people who had tried to erase her were all, at this exact moment, moving. She slept, and the city hunted, and Ngozi held on. That is where we leave them tonight. Ngozi, with a threat circling, and a baby she refuses to put down, and a courage that has not yet been tested at its full limit. Tabena, alive when she should not be, safe when the world tried everything to make her otherwise. Jae-won, with the truth finally in his hands, and a war he now knows has already started, and a daughter he has not yet held. Seo Yeon, with a grief that was a lie, and a love she has not yet been allowed to give, and Madame Choi Sunja, with the first wall down, and the rest of them coming. Part 2 is coming. And I promise you, you have not yet seen the most dangerous thing in this story. If the story held you from the first second to this one, if you felt Ngozi's hands shaking in that alley, if you felt the weight of that silence in Seo Yeon's dark room, if you need to know what happens when Jae-won walks back into that restaurant and finally holds his daughter for the first time, then do this right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notification bell so Part 2 finds you the moment it drops. Like this video. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for this story reaching the people who need to hear it. Share it with someone you love, someone who understands that the best stories are the ones that stay with you after the screen goes dark. And tell us in the comments which character broke your heart the most. Was it Ngozi, who gave everything for a baby that wasn't hers? Was it Seo Yon, who heard her daughter cry and was told she imagined it? Or was it Tobena, who came into this world already fighting? Tell us below. Thank you for watching.